The sound that broke the world was a scream. It was not a child's cry of frustration, not a shout of surprise from a game of tag. It was a raw, high-voltage sound of pure agony. It sliced through the tranquil afternoon air, bypassed my ears entirely, and plunged straight into my heart. My son Leo did not scream. He hummed when he was content. He murmured when he was contemplating the world. He spoke in quiet, carefully measured sentences that were as ordered as his thoughts. He did not scream. I was through the back door before the sound had finished its violent echo. I didn't use the stairs. I vaulted the low deck railing my feet, hitting the grass with a thud that I didn't feel. I sprinted around the side of the house, my lungs burning. My mind, usually a fortress of calm logic, became a frantic strobing slideshow of horrors. A fall from the retaining wall. A broken bone, the white of it sharp against his skin. A stray dog, its teeth bared. The reality was infinitely worse. Leo was on the ground. He was half on the public sidewalk, and half on the pristine, unnaturally emerald green lawn of our neighbor Margaret Trimmingham. His small body was convulsing. It was a terrible jerking motion, a grotesque parody of a seizure that threw him against the hard concrete again and again. His hand, his small, delicate hand, was tangled in a thin black wire. It ran along the precise edge of her grass, a wire I had noted with a vague sense of professional curiosity just yesterday. In that singular, heart-stopping moment, all professional curiosity was annihilated. It was replaced by a primal terror so profound, it felt like I was drowning in it. I didn't think. There was no time for thought. There was only instinct. I lunged for the garden bed beside me, my hand closing around a thick, dry branch left over from my weekend pruning. I scrambled to his side and swatted at his hand, a frantic, desperate blow aimed not at him, but at the wire. The branch connected. His hand was knocked free. The terrible convulsions stopped instantly. He collapsed onto the sidewalk, completely limp, his breath coming in ragged, terrified sobs that tore at the silence. His palm was a mess of red and angry blisters. A raised, burning welt was already swelling where the wire had seared his skin. My gaze, cold and sharp, followed the thin black line. It ran the entire length of her property, nestled discreetly on small black posts. A garrote wire stretched at the precise boundary where her perfect lawn met the public sidewalk. It was an electric fence, and it was active. She had weaponized her property line. From her front porch, a throne of wicker and judgment, Margaret Trimmingham watched us. Her arms were crossed over her chest. Her face was a mask of cold, unblemished satisfaction. She held a small black remote control in her right hand, its red light still faintly glowing. She had seen him fall. She had heard him scream. And she had done nothing. No, that wasn't right. That was a lie I told myself for a fraction of a second to soften the blow. She had done something. She had pressed the button. The quiet, predictable world I had so carefully constructed for my son, a world of sensory comforts and unwavering routines, had just been violently, deliberately electrocuted. And the architect of that violence was watching us. Her expression was not one of horror or shock, or even regret. It was triumph. Our entire universe revolved around Leo's needs. He was on the autism spectrum, a brilliant, gentle soul who found his only solace in order and predictability. The world to Leo was a chaotic, roaring storm of sensory input. His routines were his anchor, his lighthouse in the tempest. The most sacred of these was his afternoon walk. Every single day after school, without fail, he would walk the same 2-block loop. His feet would carefully follow the labyrinth of cracks in the pavement. His fingers would sometimes trail along the rough, textured concrete of a neighbor's retaining wall. It was how he processed his day. It was how he regulated his emotions. It was how he found a fragile peace in a world that so often gave him none. My wife Clara and I structured our entire existence around these anchors. We were a team, a well-oiled machine of love, patience, and unwavering advocacy. We were his shield. My own work in its own way, was about creating order from a different kind of chaos. As the state's lead investigator for the Public Infrastructure Safety Board, my job is to enforce the codes that keep people safe. I investigate faulty traffic signals, unpermitted construction, and dangerous electrical installations. My world is one of voltage ratings, compliance statutes, and the precise, unforgiving language of public safety law. I spend my days making sure the hidden systems that run our world don't suddenly reach out and hurt people. I never imagined I would have to apply that expertise to the sidewalk directly in front of my own house. I never imagined the threat wouldn't come from faulty wiring or corporate negligence, but from the pure, unadulterated malice of a neighbor. Clara was there now, a blur of motion and panicked cries. She knelt beside us on the cold concrete, her face pale with a terror that mirrored my own. She murmured soft, comforting words to Leo, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch his injured palm. My own terror was beginning a terrifying transformation. It was cooling, hardening, morphing into something else. It was a cold, crystalline rage. It was the focused, methodical anger of an expert who had just witnessed the most flagrant and malicious violation of everything his professional life stood for. She hadn't just hurt my son. She had built a weapon and laid it as a trap on public land. I looked from the remote in her hand to the thin black wire, to my sobbing child. She thought this was a dispute about a lawn. She thought this was about boundaries and trespassing. She had absolutely no idea that she had just declared war on a man who wrote the very safety standards she had twisted into an instrument of torture. I looked past her at the sidewalk itself. I noticed something I'd seen before, but never truly processed. The way she looked at it. Not at the people on it, but at the concrete itself. Her gaze held a special kind of hatred, a deep, personal animosity, as if the pavement were a living thing that had wronged her. That flicker of memory was a clue. I just didn't know it yet. After getting Leo inside his hand bandaged, and his small body finally quiet under a weighted blanket, the initial shock began to recede. It left behind a chilling forensic calm in its wake. Clara was a storm of righteous fury. She paced the living room like a caged tiger, her phone clutched in her hand, her thumb hovering over the numbers for the police, for a lawyer, for anyone who could bring hellfire down on that woman's head. "I'm going to handle this, Clara," I said. My voice was unnervingly low, stripped of all emotion. "Handle it, Ethan. She electrocuted our son. She needs to be arrested. She belongs in jail. And she will go there." I promised her, my eyes meeting hers. "I swear to you she will. But we are not going to do this with a screaming match and a simple assault charge. That's what she expects. That's her territory." I took a deep breath. She'll claim it was a dog fence. She'll say it was a low-voltage accident. She'll hire a lawyer who will turn this into a petty neighborhood squabble, and it will get lost in the system. We are not giving her that defense. I am going to dismantle her, piece by piece, with evidence so absolute she can't possibly refute it. My mind was already working, the gears of the investigator grinding into motion. This wasn't just a father's rage. This was a professional's calling. That night, long after Leo was finally asleep, I went back outside. The world was quiet, bathed in the cold, blue-white light of a street lamp. I wore a pair of insulated lineman's gloves from my work kit and carried my professional-grade multimeter. I knelt on the damp grass near her property line, the air still smelling faintly of ozone and malice. I carefully exposed a small section of the wire, slicing away the thin insulation with a utility knife. I attached the leads from my meter. The digital display flickered to life. My blood ran cold. This was not a standard dog fence. Not even close. Those systems operate on a tiny, harmless charge, measured in microamps. They are designed to startle, not to injure. The reading on my meter was an order of magnitude higher. The voltage was significant, but it was the amperage that made my stomach clench. It was high enough to deliver a powerful, brutally painful, and genuinely dangerous shock. She had illegally modified the system. She had bypassed the safety regulators. She had likely wired it directly into a 120-volt outdoor outlet, turning a harmless deterrent into a potent weapon. This was the first layer of the truth. The technical proof of her malice. It was irrefutable. It was damning. As I documented the readings, taking clear, time-stamped photographs with my phone, a neighbor's porch light flicked on. It was Mr. Chen, a retired engineer who lived across the street. He was a kind, quiet man who always waved to Leo. "Ethan, is everything all right?" he called out, softly stepping onto his porch. "I heard the commotion earlier." "How is the boy?" "He's resting," I said, my voice tight. "He'll be okay." But she heard him, Mr. Chen. "The fence." Mr. Chen shook his head, his expression grim in the dim light. "I'm not surprised. I've always been worried about her." He lowered his voice. "A year ago, maybe more, a young delivery driver tripped right there. On the curb. He said he got a nasty jolt from something." My head snapped up. "What happened?" "He was shaken up, but his company told him to let it go. They didn't want trouble with a resident over a little static shock. Margaret gave the boy $100, and he never came back. She told everyone he was clumsy." He paused. "I always wondered. She watches that sidewalk, like a hawk." There it was, a pattern, a prior incident covered up. My investigation was expanding. The next day, I didn't go to work. I went to the county records office. The air inside was thick with the smell of old paper and dust, a library of the city's bones. I spent hours digging through property deeds, zoning variances, and municipal archives for Margaret Trimmingham's address. And then I found it. The second layer. The key that unlocked the entire ugly story. 22 years ago, the city of Ashton Park had undertaken a major road widening project on our street. To do so, they had seized through the power of eminent domain a 5-foot wide strip of land from all the properties on her side of the street. That strip of land was used to create the public sidewalk, the very sidewalk Leo walked on every day. Margaret Trimmingham, then newly widowed, had fought it with the ferocity of a cornered animal. The file was inches thick. It was a saga of legal challenges, furious letters to the editor, and failed bitter appeals. She had sued the city, claiming the seizure was an illegal theft of her private property, a desecration of her late husband's legacy. She had lost. The court had sided with the city. The sidewalk was built. Her husband, I discovered through a quick search of old professional directories, had been a brilliant electrical engineer. His specialty, designing custom non-lethal perimeter security systems for sensitive industrial facilities. All the pieces snapped into place with a sickening, horrifying clarity. The sidewalk for her was not a public right-of-way. It was a monument to her greatest defeat. It was a daily concrete reminder of the land that had been stolen from her. For over 2 decades, a deep and bitter grudge had festered, poisoning her from the inside out. This wasn't about a pristine lawn. This was about revenge. This was a one-woman war against the city, against the public, against the very existence of that strip of concrete. The fence wasn't just to keep people off her grass. It was a way for her to unilaterally and violently reclaim her lost territory. She had taken her late husband's expertise and twisted it into a tool of punitive personal justice. She had turned a public walkway into a trap for anyone who dared to use it. Leo, with his innocent, predictable routine, had simply been the first victim to walk into her 22-year-old ambush. My investigation was no longer about a malicious neighbor. It was about a long-term, premeditated campaign against the public, culminating in a targeted assault on a disabled child. Feeling the weight of this, I knew I couldn't just go to the local precinct. This was bigger. I compiled my findings, the multimeter readings, the city codes, the story of the delivery driver, the eminent domain history, and submitted a formal preliminary report to the town solicitor's office. I needed to start an official paper trail. The response came faster than I expected, but not from the solicitor. My phone rang the next afternoon. The caller ID read Ashton Park Town Hall. "Mr. Thorne, This is Councilman Jennings. The voice was smooth-polished, but with an undercurrent of steel. I've been made aware of your report concerning Mrs. Trimmingham. Councilman, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I trust you found it as disturbing as I did. What I find disturbing, Mr. Thorne, he said, his voice dropping slightly, is an overzealous state employee using his position to escalate a neighborhood dispute. These things are best handled quietly. Offense taken down, an apology, we all move on. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. My son was electrocuted, Councilman. This is far beyond a neighborhood dispute. Mrs. Trimmingham is a long-standing, respected member of this community, Jennings countered. And I remember the eminent domain case. It was a difficult but necessary decision for the good of the town. Raking all that up serves no one. He remembered the case. The connection was there. It serves the truth, I said flatly. There was a pause. Let me be clearer. Mr. Thorne, Jennings said, all pretense of friendliness gone. Your position with the state board relies on maintaining good working relationships with municipal governments like ours. It would be a shame if those relationships were to become strained. It would be a shame if your professional judgment were to be called into question. Do you understand what I'm saying? The threat was unmistakable. He was protecting her. He was protecting the town's old decision. He was telling me to back down, or he would come after my career. The stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about Margaret anymore. It was about a system trying to protect itself. That night, I knew I needed more. Jennings would try to bury my report. He would cast doubt on my methods. I needed something he couldn't spin. I needed a smoking gun. My mind went back to the fence. The power source. She couldn't have run a wire from the front of the house. It had to be drawing power from somewhere less conspicuous. The side, maybe near the basement. I also had a legal and moral obligation. The fence was still there. It was still a threat. I had to disable it. That was my justification, the shield of my professional duty. At 2 a.m., dressed in dark clothing, I slipped out of my house. The street was a ghost town. I moved silently along the shadows, my heart pounding a heavy rhythm against my ribs. I hopped the low fence into her backyard, landing softly on the manicured grass. It felt like stepping into enemy territory. I scanned the foundation of her house with a low-powered flashlight. There, tucked away in a grimy, cobweb-filled basement window, was an outdoor-rated electrical outlet. A heavy-duty extension cord snaked out of it and disappeared into the dirt, heading directly for the fence line. This was it. The source. I knelt in the dirt, my flashlight beam focused on the plug. As I worked to carefully disconnect it, the beam illuminated the interior of the window, catching the grimy pane of the basement window. And through the glass, I saw it. A workbench, lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. And spread across the workbench, held down by old coffee mugs and tools, were blueprints. I knew that format. The precise lines, the technical callouts, the title block in the corner. They were professional electrical schematics. I pressed my phone's camera lens directly against the cold, dirty glass, angling it to get past the glare. I zoomed in. My breath caught in my throat. The title block read, Trimmingham Engineering, Perimeter Security Solutions. And scrawled across the diagrams in angry red ink were handwritten modifications. Notes about bypassing voltage limiters. Calculations to increase amperage from a standard 120-volt source. It was her husband's work, defiled and weaponized by her rage. It was the complete, undeniable proof of premeditated malicious intent. She hadn't just modified a dog fence. She had built a weapon from her dead husband's plans. I took a dozen pictures, my hands shaking slightly. This was the evidence Jennings couldn't bury. This was the key. The town hall auditorium was brightly lit and half full for the bi-monthly council meeting. The air hummed with the usual civic procedure and minor resident complaints. Margaret Trimmingham was there, seated in the third row. She was on the agenda to complain about the city's choice of autumn flowering plants for the median strips. She looked calm, composed, a pillar of the community, ready to exercise her civic duty. Next to her, looking equally serene, sat Councilman Jennings. He caught my eye as I walked in and gave me a small dismissive shake of his head. He thought he had won. He thought I was intimidated. He felt untouchable. I sat in the back with Clara, a heavy binder on my lap. I had already forwarded my entire updated file, including the new photographs, to the chief of police and the town solicitor an hour earlier. They were present now, a quiet official presence near the side entrance that went unnoticed by most. They knew what was coming. When the public comment period opened, I was the first to the microphone. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the hall. "My name is Ethan Thorne. I am a resident of the preserve at Ashton Park. I am also the state's lead investigator for the Public Infrastructure Safety Board." This statement caused a ripple. The council members sat up a little straighter. I saw Jennings shift in his seat, his placid expression tightening. Margaret's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine unease finally showing. "I'm here tonight to report a grave and deliberate public safety failure," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "An act that constitutes, in my professional opinion, the weaponization of public infrastructure against a citizen, specifically a disabled child." A murmur went through the audience. I had their full attention. Last Sunday, my son was injured by an illegal high-powered electric fence that had been installed on the public right-of-way on my street. I paused, letting the silence stretch. The fence was installed and activated by my neighbor, Margaret Trimmingham. I turned and looked directly at her. Her face had gone chalk white, but her expression was one of pure defiance. Mrs. Trimmingham, and perhaps even certain members of this council, would like to portray this as an unfortunate accident. I continued, my eyes flicking to Jennings. They might claim it was a simple dog fence. That would be a lie. I opened my binder on the lectern. As part of my investigation, I tested the device. A legal dog fence operates at a negligible amperage. The device Mrs. Trimmingham installed was putting out nearly 50 milliamps a charge. That is not only brutally painful, but is categorized by national safety standards as potentially dangerous. I have the data here. I placed a sheet with the graphed readouts onto the overhead projector. The sharp, menacing spike of the graph filled the screen behind the council members. The installation was a flagrant violation of at least 4 separate city electrical and zoning codes. It was an unpermitted high-voltage system wired directly into her house's main power. It was, in short, a booby trap. Margaret shot to her feet. "This is an outrageous slander. That is my property. I was protecting my property from trespassers. Your property." I countered, my voice sharp and cutting. "That's the core of this, isn't it? This was never about your lawn. This is about a sidewalk." I turned back to the council. I also did some research in the town archives. I found the records of the eminent domain seizure for the sidewalk on my street from 22 years ago. I found Mrs. Trimmingham's lengthy and ultimately failed legal battle to stop its construction. A battle that Councilman Jennings seems to remember well. Jennings looked like he had been struck. Margaret's face was now a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her carefully maintained composure had shattered. This wasn't an act of property protection. I declared, my voice ringing with the weight of my conviction. This was a calculated act of revenge against the public. She was taking back the land she felt was stolen from her. She turned a public right-of-way, a space every citizen has a right to use safely, into her own private execution ground. Then, the final blow. "For anyone who still believes this could have been an accident," I said, pulling out my phone and connecting it to the projector, "here are photographs I took last night. They show the workbench in Mrs. Trimmingham's basement. On it, you can see the professional schematics created by her late husband. And on those schematics, you can see her handwritten notes detailing exactly how to turn a security system into a weapon. The images flashed onto the screen. The blueprints, the red ink, the undeniable proof. A collective gasp, sharp and horrified, went through the auditorium. This is not a zoning dispute. I said, my voice low and final. This is a depraved act of violence against a child. I have filed a full report with the police department and the district attorney recommending felony charges for assault with a deadly weapon and the willful creation of a hazardous condition on public infrastructure. I trust the town council will take every necessary step to ensure that no other child is ever victimized by a private citizen's bitter war against the public good. I stepped back from the microphone. The room was utterly silent, the air thick with shock and horror. Jennings was frozen, his face ashen. Then, the chief of police stood up from his seat at the side of the room. He gave a quiet, firm nod to two uniformed officers who had been waiting at the back. They began to walk down the center aisle. Their path was clear. Their destination was absolute. They were walking towards Margaret Trimmingham. Her arrest at the meeting was a bombshell. But my fight wasn't over. Margaret, out on bail, hired a shark, a high-priced lawyer from the city named Markson, known for his aggressive, scorched-earth tactics. The narrative immediately shifted. Markson went on the offensive. He filed motions to have all my evidence suppressed. He claimed my multimeter test was an illegal search. He painted my nighttime excursion to disable the fence, not as a public safety measure, but as a criminal trespass. The photos of the schematics, he argued, were fruit of the poisonous tree, obtained illegally, and therefore inadmissible. He gave interviews to local news outlets portraying me as a vindictive neighbor, a state official on a power trip, abusing his authority to settle a personal score. He was trying to poison the jury pool and discredit me completely. The district attorney's office got nervous. The airtight case was suddenly looking murky. The innovative charge of assault with weaponized infrastructure was in jeopardy. My own career was now under a microscope, just as Jennings had threatened. The aftermath was no longer a simple legal procedure. It was a grueling war of attrition. I was deposed for hours, Markson dissecting my every action, my every motive. It was Clara's unwavering belief in me, and the memory of Leo's scream that kept me from breaking. The turning point came from an unexpected place. The story of the town hall confrontation and Markson's subsequent media campaign had spread. The young delivery driver, the one Mr. Chen had told me about, came forward. He was no longer a scared kid. He was a young man with a family, and he was furious that she had hurt a child. His testimony detailing the shock, the $100 hush money, and the intimidation from his old employer was crucial. It established a clear pattern of prior acts. It destroyed Markson's narrative of a one-time accident. Faced with a corroborated history of malice and the near certainty of a conviction, Margaret's fight collapsed. She accepted a plea bargain that was anything but lenient. It included jail time, a lengthy probation that forbade her from ever returning to Ashton Park, and the complete forfeiture of her house. The proceeds from its sale were used to pay for Leo's ongoing therapy and medical costs. The substantial remainder went into a new town fund named in Leo's honor, dedicated to improving accessibility and public safety infrastructure. Councilman Jennings quietly announced he would not be seeking re-election. For Leo, the path to recovery was slow. The psychological trauma ran deeper than the physical burn. The sidewalk, once his sanctuary, was a place of terror. But our community, shaken from its complacency, rallied. The family who bought Margaret's house tore out the perfect, hateful lawn and planted a sprawling, chaotic, beautiful butterfly garden right up to the pavement's edge. Mr. Chen, my first ally in the dark, built Leo an intricate hand-carved model of the solar system, engaging him with his deep love for patterns and order. Slowly, we reclaimed the sidewalk, first to the end of our driveway, then to the corner. One day, months later, on a cool, crisp autumn afternoon, he took my hand. His grip was tight, his knuckles white, but he walked. He walked the entire length of the block past the house, that no longer held any power past the garden filled with fluttering life. He didn't flinch. His eyes were fixed on the cracks in the pavement, his anchor in a world that was slowly, piece by piece, becoming predictable again. He stopped in the exact spot where he had fallen. He stooped down and picked up a perfect crimson maple leaf from the concrete. He traced its delicate veins with the tip of his finger, completely absorbed in its intricate, flawless design. He looked up at me, and a small, genuine smile touched his face. It was the first one I had seen in months that truly reached his eyes. "It's symmetrical," he said quietly. I felt my own smile wobble, my heart aching with a love so fierce it was a physical pressure in my chest. "Yes, it is, buddy. It's perfect." The wire was gone. The monster was gone. The war was over. The fight had been for his right to exist peacefully, for the sanctity of public space, for the simple, profound idea that the rules must apply to everyone. Watching my son lost in the quiet wonder of a single maple leaf, I knew we had won. The path was safe again, and he was free to walk it.